Dr. Eleanor Rodriguez couldn't believe what she was seeing on her computer screen. After 15 years of listening to space signals at the radio telescope facility in Chile, she had finally found something that made her heart race: the numbers. Flowing across her monitor weren't random noise from distant stars. They were patterns, mathematical sequences that could only mean one thing: someone was trying to talk to Earth. She rubbed her tired eyes and looked again. The signal was getting stronger by the hour, like a radio station coming into better reception as he drove closer to the city. Elena had spent her whole career hoping for this moment, but now that it was happening, she felt scared and excited at the same time. 3 days later, the whole world changed forever. Giant ships appeared in the sky above major cities around the globe. They weren't the flying saucers from old movies. These looked like floating crystal palaces. Beautiful and mysterious, the ships hung silently in the air, reflecting sunlight like massive diamonds. People came out of their houses and offices to stare up at them, some taking pictures, others praying, and many just standing there with their mouths open. The beings who came down from the ships were unlike anything humans had ever imagined. They were tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to glow with a soft inner light. When they walked, they moved like dancers, and their voices sounded like music when they spoke. They called themselves the Kethmori, and they came with gifts and promises that seemed too good to be true. Through devices that translated their words perfectly into any human language, the Kethmori spoke of friendship and cooperation. They said they had been watching Earth from far away and wanted to help humanity solve its biggest problems. They offered cures for diseases that had puzzled doctors for centuries, clean energy that could power the whole world without pollution, and knowledge about traveling to other planets among the stars. World leaders rushed to meet with these visitors. President Martinez of the Global Alliance, Secretary General Okafor of the United Nations, and leaders from every major country gathered for emergency meetings. The excitement was incredible. Here were answers to climate change, to hunger, to the energy crisis that had been troubling the world for decades. The Kethmori asked for very little in return. They only wanted permission to build some small settlements in remote areas, where they could set up what they called cultural exchange centers. They chose places far from big cities, empty desert areas in Australia, cold regions in Siberia, and quiet spots in the Sahara Desert. These locations seemed perfect because they wouldn't bother anyone, and the aliens promised their presence would actually help improve these harsh environments. But while the rest of the world celebrated, Elena felt something wasn't right. She had been studying the signals from their ships for weeks now, and what she saw worried her. The electromagnetic readings weren't just from engines or communication systems. The ships were scanning Earth with an intensity that reminded her of how doctors scan patients before surgery, like they were mapping every detail of the planet's surface and atmosphere. When Elena tried to share her concerns with her supervisors, they told her to stop being so negative. Dr. Williams, the facility director, actually laughed at her worries. "Elena, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to humanity," he said. "Don't let your fear ruin this opportunity for everyone." The media was completely caught up in the excitement too. Every news channel showed the same images over and over. The beautiful Kethmori demonstrating their amazing technology, sick children being cured instantly by alien medicine, and politicians shaking hands with beings from another world. Anyone who suggested caution was labeled as a troublemaker or conspiracy theorist. Elena watched as construction began on the first Kethmori settlement in the Australian desert. The aliens worked incredibly fast, using technology that seemed to grow buildings rather than construct them. Their structures looked like living crystals that emerged from the ground and shaped themselves into complex forms. Within just 2 weeks, what had been empty desert was transformed into a shimmering city that looked like something from a dream. The same thing happened at the other sites. In Siberia, a facility rose from the frozen ground, its walls pulsing with warm light that melted the snow around it. In the Sahara, crystalline towers sprouted from the sand dunes, creating an oasis of strange beauty in the harsh desert landscape. The Kethmori explained that their technology was based on biological principles rather than mechanical ones, instead of building with metal and concrete like humans did. They grew their structures using advanced organic processes. This made their cities seem alive, breathing and changing subtly as the days passed. As the weeks went by, Elena continued her observations from the radio telescope. She noticed that the communication patterns between the Kethmori settlements were becoming more complex and frequent. But what really bothered her was that she was picking up signals going out into space, not just to other Kethmori on Earth, but to somewhere far beyond the solar system. Late one night, while analyzing these transmissions, Elena made a discovery that chilled her to the bone. The signals weren't random communications between friends. They were regular reports, detailed updates being sent to what could only be a much larger force waiting somewhere in the darkness between the stars. Elena realized she was watching the opening moves of something much bigger than anyone imagined. The Kethmori hadn't come alone, and their beautiful gifts might be hiding a terrible purpose. But when she tried to warn anyone who would listen, she found that the world had already fallen in love with its new visitors. The aliens had played their first move perfectly. They had given humanity exactly what it wanted to see: salvation, hope, and a bright future among the stars. But Elena suspected that what they really wanted in return was much more than anyone realized. As she sat alone in her laboratory, surrounded by data that nobody wanted to believe, Elena made a decision. If the authorities wouldn't listen to her warnings, she would have to find another way to protect her planet. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to become the first soldier in a war that would determine the fate of every living thing on Earth. The beautiful visitors had arrived, with smiles and gifts, but Elena feared they had come to take everything. 6 months had passed since the Kethmori arrived, and the world seemed like a better place. At least, that's what everyone wanted to believe. The alien medicine had cured thousands of people. Their clean energy was powering entire cities, and their promises of space travel filled every news broadcast. But some people were starting to notice things that didn't quite add up. Dr. James Chen was one of those people. He spent his days studying ocean life near the Pacific coast, where one of the largest Kethmori settlements had been built on a floating platform just offshore. James had been diving in these waters for 20 years, and he knew every fish, every coral formation, every tiny creature that called this place home. That's why he immediately noticed when things started to change. At first, it was subtle. Some of the smaller fish seemed less active than usual. The coral that had been bright and colorful for decades began to look pale and sick. James thought it might be another case of ocean warming, something scientists had been fighting for years. But when he looked closer under his microscope, he found something that made his hands shake. Tiny organisms were living in the water that he had never seen before. They weren't like anything in his textbooks or computer databases. These microscopic creatures seemed to be breaking down the natural ocean life and replacing it with something completely different. It was like watching someone slowly repaint a masterpiece, turning it into something unrecognizable. James collected samples and ran test after test. Each result was the same. These alien microbes were systematically changing the ocean's chemistry. They weren't just living alongside Earth's natural life. They were replacing it piece by piece, so slowly that most people wouldn't notice for months or even years. Meanwhile, in a small office in Geneva, Maria Santos was discovering her own piece of the puzzle. Maria used to work for international security agencies, tracking how goods and supplies moved around the world. She had a talent for spotting patterns that others missed, and lately, those patterns were keeping her awake at night. Food shipments were being redirected to areas near Kethmori settlements in quantities that didn't make sense. According to official reports, each settlement housed about 5,000 aliens. But the amount of supplies being delivered could feed 10 times that many people. Either the Kethmori ate enormous amounts of food, or there were a lot more of them than anyone was being told. Maria started using satellite images to check the settlements, but getting access to current photos was becoming surprisingly difficult. Government agencies that used to share information freely were now claiming that the images were classified for security reasons. When she finally managed to get some pictures through old contacts, What she saw made her stomach drop. The settlements weren't staying within their original boundaries. They were growing, expanding outward like living things. The crystal structures were spreading underground, creating networks that connected the different sites across continents. What had started as small cultural exchange centers were becoming vast complexes that stretched for miles beneath the Earth's surface. Back in Chile, Eleanor Rodriguez was piecing together her own disturbing discoveries. For months, she had been tracking the communication patterns between Kethmori sites and the signals they sent into space. What she found was a sophisticated coordination system that looked nothing like the friendly cultural exchange the aliens claimed to be conducting. The Kethmori weren't just chatting with each other. They were receiving detailed instructions from ships that were still hidden somewhere beyond Earth's detection range. Eleanor realized that what everyone was seeing, the beautiful visitors with their gifts and promises, was just the advance team. There were others coming, many others, and they were waiting for some kind of signal before revealing themselves. When Ellen tried to arrange a meeting with the UN Committee overseeing alien relations, she found her security clearance had been mysteriously revoked. Dr. Williams, her supervisor, told her that her negative attitude was causing problems and that she was being placed on administrative leave. James Chen discovered that his research funding had been cut, and his access to the coastal areas near Kethmori settlements was now restricted. Maria Santos learned that her former colleagues in the intelligence community were no longer taking her calls. Worse, when she tried to access government databases she had used for years, she found herself locked out completely. Someone with serious authority was making sure that anyone asking uncomfortable questions was silenced, but the three researchers were stubborn. Instead of giving up, they decided to work together. Using encrypted messages and old-fashioned meetings in public places, they began sharing their findings. What they discovered when they put all their evidence together was terrifying. The Kethmori settlements weren't just expanding. They were transforming the environment around them. Animals near the sites were getting sick with diseases that Earth's veterinarians had never seen before. The underground networks were doing something to the water supplies, changing their chemical composition in ways that seemed designed to support different kinds of life. Most frightening of all, the beautiful flowering plants that had appeared around Kethmori sites weren't Earth species at all. They were alien organisms designed to slowly change the atmosphere, making it more suitable for Kethmori biology, while making it harder for Earth life to survive. Elena, James, and Maria realized they weren't dealing with friendly visitors who wanted to share knowledge. They were facing an invasion that was so subtle and well-planned that most people wouldn't recognize it until it was too late. The Kethmori had studied humanity carefully, learning exactly what gifts and promises would make people welcome them. With open arms, the three scientists knew they had to warn someone, but who would believe them? The media was still celebrating the aliens as humanity's saviors. World leaders were too invested in the partnership to admit they might have made a mistake, and anyone who tried to speak out was being systematically discredited or silenced. As they sat in a small coffee shop in Denver, sharing their evidence and trying to figure out what to do next, Elena noticed something that made her blood run cold. At a table across the room, a figure in a long coat was watching them carefully. The person's face was hidden, but there was something about the way they moved that seemed familiar, too graceful, too smooth, like the Kethmori she had seen on television. The invasion wasn't just changing Earth's environment. The aliens had begun infiltrating human society, watching and listening to make sure their plan proceeded without interference. Elena, James, and Maria realized they weren't just researchers anymore. They were fugitives in their own world, racing against time to expose a truth that almost no one wanted to hear. The beautiful gifts had been bait, and humanity had taken it completely. Now the real work of conquest was beginning, and Earth's new visitors were making sure that anyone who might interfere would be stopped before they could sound the alarm. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came on a Tuesday morning in spring. Almost a year after the Kethmori had arrived, people living near the alien settlements woke up to see something that took their breath away. Overnight, the empty land around the crystal cities had burst into bloom with flowers. Unlike anything anyone had ever seen, these weren't ordinary flowers. They glowed with their own soft light, creating fields of blue, purple, and silver that stretched as far as the eye could see. The petals seemed to shimmer and dance even when there was no wind, and they gave off a sweet smell that made people feel calm and happy. News crews rushed to film the phenomenon, calling it the Great Blooming and treating it like a miracle. The Kethmori appeared on every major television network to explain what was happening. Their spokesperson, a tall, graceful being who called himself Ambassador Velter, smiled as he spoke to the cameras. "This is a gift of harmony," he said in his musical voice. "Our biology has learned to work together with your beautiful planet. These flowers show that Earth welcomes us as friends." Tourists came from around the world to see the glowing fields. Families took pictures among the strange blossoms, children played in the flower meadows, and couples got married surrounded by the otherworldly beauty. Everyone said it was the most wonderful thing they had ever seen. But Dr. Priya Patel wasn't celebrating. She was a plant scientist who had joined Elena's secret research group after losing her job for asking too many questions about the alien technology. Working in a hidden laboratory that the team had set up in an old mine shaft in Colorado, Priya spent days analyzing samples of the glowing flowers. What she found made her hands tremble as she typed her report. The flowers weren't plants at all. They were incredibly sophisticated biological machines, designed to look beautiful while they slowly poison Earth's atmosphere. Each bloom was releasing tiny amounts of methane and other gases, while absorbing oxygen from the air. The changes were so small that Earth's monitoring systems couldn't detect them, but over time, they would make the planet's air unbreathable for human life. Even worse, the flowers were spreading, not by dropping seeds like normal plants, but by sending out microscopic spores that traveled on the wind and took root wherever they landed. Within months, similar glowing blooms were appearing in areas hundreds of miles away from the original Kethmori settlements. Meanwhile, Dr. Michael Torres, a geologist who had also joined the resistance after being fired from his university position, was studying earthquake data from around the alien sites. What he discovered was even more terrifying than Priya's findings about the flowers. The Kethmori settlements weren't just sitting on top of the ground. They were digging deep into the earth, creating vast underground chambers that stretched for miles in every direction. The seismic readings showed that these spaces were being filled with some kind of organic material that pulsed and grew like living tissue. Michael realized that the aliens weren't just changing Earth's surface and atmosphere. They were literally growing a new planet inside the old one, preparing to replace everything that had existed before their arrival. The beautiful crystal cities that everyone admired were just the visible tips of enormous underground factories that were transforming the world from within. Elena and her team now numbered 12 scientists from different fields, all working in secret to understand what was really happening to their planet. They communicated through ham radios and old computer networks, meeting in abandoned buildings and empty parking lots to share their discoveries. Dr. Lisa Wong, a medical researcher, had been studying blood samples from people who lived near the Kethmori settlements. She found traces of alien microorganisms in their systems, not enough to make them sick, but enough to slowly change their biology. The people didn't know it was happening, but their bodies were being prepared for something when the team tried to publish their research through scientific journals. They found their papers rejected without explanation. When they tried to contact news reporters, they discovered that most media outlets had been given exclusive access deals with the Kethmori. That prevented them from reporting negative stories about the aliens. Worse still, team members started receiving threatening phone calls in the middle of the night. Elena's apartment was broken into, though nothing was stolen. James Chen found his car windows smashed, and a note warning him to stop interfering with human progress. Maria Santos discovered that her credit cards had been canceled and her bank accounts frozen. The message was clear: anyone who opposed the Kethmori would face serious consequences. But the breaking point came when Eleanor received a video call from her younger sister Anna, who was studying medicine in Berlin. Anna's face was pale with fear as she spoke in whispers from her dormitory room. "Elena, "Something strange is happening here," Anna said, looking over her shoulder as if she was afraid someone might overhear. "These Kethmori advisors have been going door to door in every neighborhood, offering free health checkups. They say it's to help people adapt to the changing environment. But they're taking blood samples from everyone, even healthy people." Elena felt her heart sink as she listened to her sister describe how the aliens were systematically collecting biological samples from humans across the globe. It wasn't just happening in Berlin. Reports were coming in from cities everywhere that Kethmori medical teams were conducting what they call wellness assessments on entire populations. "They came to my building yesterday," Anna continued, "when Mrs. Mueller refused to give them a blood sample. They said she might not be eligible for the new treatments that would help humans survive. In Earth's changing atmosphere, she got scared and agreed. Elena, I think they're preparing us for something, and I don't think it's good." As Elena ended the call with her sister, she looked around at her team of fellow researchers working frantically in their underground hideout. They had uncovered the truth about the Kethmori's real plan, but they were running out of time to do anything about it. The aliens weren't just terraforming Earth's environment. They were terraforming humanity itself, slowly modifying people's biology to serve some unknown purpose. The beautiful visitors who had promised to lift humanity to the stars were actually preparing to absorb the human race into their own biological systems. Eleanor realized that her team wasn't just fighting for Earth's independence anymore. They were fighting for the survival of the human species, and they were losing the battle. The Kethmori had planned their invasion so carefully that they were always 3 steps ahead of anyone who tried to stop them. But Eleanor refused to give up. As she watched her team working through the night, analyzing samples and tracking the spread of alien influence across the globe, she made a promise to herself and to her sister. Somehow, some way, they would find a weakness in the Kethmori plan and use it to save their world. The question was whether they could do it before humanity was changed so completely that there would be nothing left to save. 2 years had passed since the Kethmori first appeared in Earth's skies, and the world was no longer the same place. The changes were everywhere now, impossible to hide or explain away. Ocean fish were dying in massive numbers, strange weather patterns were destroying crops across entire continents, and new diseases were appearing that seemed specifically designed to weaken human immune systems. But instead of panic, there was an odd sense of acceptance among most people. The Kethmori had positioned themselves perfectly as humanity's only hope for survival. Their medical centers offered treatments that could help humans adapt to the changing environment. Their scientists explained that evolution was a natural process, and those who embraced the changes would thrive in the new world that was coming. Eleanor Rodriguez and her team of rebel scientists had grown from 12 desperate researchers into a global network of thousands. They called themselves the Terran Liberation Front, and they had learned to operate like an underground resistance movement. They communicated through old ham radios, left coded messages in library books, and met in places the Kethmori couldn't easily monitor: abandoned subway tunnels, empty shopping malls, and forgotten military bunkers. The resistance had supporters in every major city now. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a former weapons researcher from Tokyo, had become their most valuable asset. Before the Kethmori arrived, Yuki had been working on biological defense systems for the Japanese military. Now, she was using that knowledge to find ways to fight back against the alien invasion. Working in a secret laboratory built inside an old subway station beneath New York City, Yuki made a discovery that changed everything she had been studying: fragments of Kethmori technology that the resistance had managed to collect from abandoned settlements. And she found something remarkable about how it worked. Their technology isn't built like ours, Yuki explained to Elena during one of their encrypted video calls. We make machines from metal and circuits, but everything the Kethmori use is grown, like plants or bacteria. Their ships, their buildings, even their weapons are all biological systems. This discovery was crucial because it meant the alien technology had the same weaknesses as living things. It could get sick, it could be poisoned, and it could be turned against itself if you knew how to do it. Yuki began developing what she called biologic viruses, engineered organisms, that could infect Kethmori technology and cause it to malfunction. It was incredibly dangerous work. One mistake could create something that would attack Earth's own biological systems, making the situation even worse. The first test came when the resistance targeted a small Kethmori outpost in the mountains of Canada. The facility was isolated and lightly guarded, making it perfect for experimenting with their new biological weapons. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, a former Special Forces soldier who had become the Resistance's military leader, led a team of 12 volunteers on what they all knew might be a suicide mission. They approached the Crystal facility at night using equipment that Yuki had designed to avoid detection by the aliens' biological sensors. The building pulsed with soft light, its walls seeming to breathe like the chest of a sleeping giant. Lisa's team planted small containers of Yuki's biovirus around the structure and retreated to a safe distance. Within hours, the effect was dramatic. The alien facility began to change color, its crystal walls turning from beautiful blue to an ugly brown. Strange sounds came from inside, groaning and crackling noises like a tree falling in a storm. By morning, the entire structure had collapsed into a pile of organic debris that looked more like compost than advanced technology. The Kethmori were forced to evacuate, but their response was swift and brutal. Within days, entire human communities near resistance activities were surrounded by alien security forces. The Kethmori claimed these areas were contaminated with dangerous biological agents and needed to be quarantined for public safety. But the people who were taken away were never seen again. Elena watched the news reports with growing horror as towns and neighborhoods disappeared behind Kethmori barriers. The aliens claimed they were protecting the population while they cleaned up the contamination. But satellite images showed the areas being completely transformed. Their buildings dissolved and replaced with alien structures. Lisa Rodriguez led increasingly desperate raids to rescue people from these quarantine zones and gather intelligence about what was happening inside them. What her teams found in the abandoned facilities defied imagination. The buildings were filled with strange chambers containing human-shaped forms suspended in glowing liquid. At first, they thought these were people being held prisoner, but closer examination revealed something much worse. The humans in these tanks were being changed, their bodies slowly modified to serve as living components in Kethmori biological systems. Some had grown extra organs that pulsed with alien energy. Others had developed new types of skin that could process different kinds of atmosphere. All of them had lost something essentially human in their faces, the spark of individual consciousness that made people more than just biological machines. Dr. Chen, the marine biologist who had first discovered the alien microorganisms in the ocean, managed to rescue one of these modified humans from a facility in Australia. The person, it was impossible to tell if they had originally been a man or woman, could still speak, but their words came out in the musical tones of Kethmori language. "The integration is beautiful," the modified human said, their voice eerily calm. "Pain ends when you become part of the greater organism. Individual suffering becomes collective harmony." Elena realized that the Kethmori weren't just planning to replace Earth's environment and atmosphere. They were planning to absorb humanity itself into their biological network, turning people into willing participants in their own extinction. The resistance was running out of time and options. Every successful attack brought brutal retaliation against innocent civilians. Every day that passed meant more people were being taken to the modification centers. And despite all their efforts, the alien terraforming process was accelerating. But Elena had one advantage that the Kethmori didn't know about. During her years of monitoring their communications, she had learned to understand parts of their language. And lately, she had been intercepting messages that suggested the aliens were facing unexpected problems. With their colonization plan, something on Earth was fighting back against them, something they hadn't anticipated when they first arrived. With their beautiful gifts and promises of friendship, the planet itself seemed to be developing resistance to their biological modifications. And that resistance was growing strong every day. Elena didn't fully understand what was happening yet, but she sensed that Earth was preparing to defend itself in ways that neither humans nor aliens had imagined. The question was whether the resistance could survive long enough for that defense to matter, and whether there would be any unmodified humans left to save when the real battle finally began. As she sat in her underground command center, surrounded by maps showing Kethmori expansion and reports of failed rescue missions, Elena made a decision that would determine the fate of both species. It was time to stop playing defense and start trusting in something bigger than human technology or alien science. It was time to let Earth fight back with its own ancient weapons. In the final months of what would later be called the Silent War, Elena Rodriguez made a discovery that changed everything. She was working late in the underground laboratory, analyzing soil samples that resistance teams had collected from battleground areas where both Kethmori terraforming and human resistance activities had been most intense. Under her microscope, she saw something that made her call out to the other scientists working nearby. The soil was alive with activity, but not the kind of alien microorganisms that James Chen had found in the ocean 2 years earlier. These were Earth bacteria and fungi, but they had changed in ways that seemed impossible. The planet's own microscopic life was fighting back. Elena watched in amazement as Earth's bacteria attacked and consumed alien microorganisms with an efficiency that seemed almost intelligent. The tiny creatures had learned to recognize Kethmori biology as foreign and dangerous, developing new abilities to break down alien proteins and neutralize their effects. "Look at this," Elena called to Yuki, who rushed over to peer into the microscope. The planet is teaching itself how to fight the invasion. What they were seeing was Earth's immune system in action, just like a human body learns to recognize and fight off diseases. The planet's biological network was adapting to resist the alien terraforming. Every battle between resistance bioviruses and Kethmori technology had taught Earth's microorganisms something new about how to defend themselves. The discovery meant that all their desperate fighting hadn't been in vain. Every facility they had attacked, every biovirus Yuki had created, every small victory had been like a vaccination, teaching the planet how to recognize and reject the alien invasion. Working frantically through the night, Yuki began developing what they called the Gaia Protocol, a way to amplify and direct Earth's natural immune response. Instead of fighting the Kethmori with weapons or technology, they would help the planet heal itself by giving its own defenses the tools they needed to win. The plan was incredibly risky. They would need to release modified Earth bacteria simultaneously at Kethmori sites around the globe, creating a chain reaction that would spread the planet's immune response everywhere at once. If they made a mistake, they could damage Earth's own ecosystem. But if they did nothing, there would soon be no Earth ecosystem left to save. Captain Rodriguez assembled teams of volunteers from around the world. These weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. They were teachers, mechanics, farmers, and students who had lost everything to the alien invasion and were willing to risk their lives for one last chance to save their planet. The operation began at dawn on a Tuesday morning. In the Australian desert, teams led by Dr. Chen released clouds of enhanced Earth bacteria near the largest Kethmori facility in Siberia. Volunteers who had trained for months in Arctic survival scattered similar organisms around them. Alien city that had grown from the frozen ground in the Sahara. Resistance fighters on camels rode through sandstorms to plant bacterial cultures around the crystal towers that rose from the dunes. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The Kethmori continued their daily routines. Their beautiful crystal cities pulsed with the same soft light they had always shone, and their atmospheric processors kept working to change Earth's air. But Elena, monitoring communications from her command center, began to notice changes in the alien transmissions. The Kethmori were reporting system failures, equipment malfunctions, and what they described as biological contamination events at sites around the globe. The enhanced Earth bacteria were spreading faster than anyone had hoped. They traveled through water systems, soil networks, and even through the air, carrying their anti-alien programming to every corner of the planet. Wherever they encountered Kethmori technology or biology, they attacked with the focused intensity. of white blood cells fighting an infection. Within weeks, the effects became visible to everyone. The glowing flowers that had once seemed so beautiful began to wither and die. The crystal cities started to lose their perfect symmetry as biological corrosion ate away at their organic structures, most dramatically, the massive underground. Networks that the aliens had grown beneath 3 continents began to collapse as Earth fungi invaded and consumed them. The Kethmori, who had seemed so confident and superior for 2 years, were now visibly struggling. Their graceful forms began to deteriorate as Earth's atmosphere became hostile to their biology. The planet that had once welcomed them was now rejecting them at the most fundamental level. Ambassador Velter appeared on television for the last time, his usually perfect appearance now showing signs of decay. His translucent skin had developed dark patches, and his musical voice had become harsh and strained. "The biological incompatibility is greater than our models predicted," he announced. "Immediate evacuation protocols are being implemented for the safety of both species." But it was already too late for an orderly withdrawal. The alien ships that descended from orbit to collect their people were themselves suffering from biological failure. Earth's enhanced microorganisms had learned to recognize and attack any Kethmori technology, including their spacecraft. Eleanor watched from a hilltop outside Denver as one of the great crystal ships tried to lift off from a nearby facility. The vessel, which had once moved with impossible grace, now struggled against Earth's gravity like a dying bird. Sections of its organic hull were dissolving, leaving trails of decomposing material in the sky. The ship made it only a few miles before it began to fall apart completely. Eleanor watched it crash into an empty field where Earth bacteria immediately began breaking down the wreckage. Within hours, there was nothing left but a patch of unusually fertile soil. Similar scenes played out around the world as the Kethmori fleet tried desperately to escape a planet that had become poisonous to their existence. Some ships managed to reach space, but even they were infected with Earth's biological defenses. Long-range telescopes tracked them as they limped away from the solar system, their hulls continuing to deteriorate as they fled. The few Kethmori who remained on Earth didn't last long. Their bodies, designed for a completely different type of world, simply couldn't survive in an environment that had learned to see them as a disease. They died not from violence, but from the planet's quiet, implacable rejection of their presence. In the months that followed, Elena and her team worked to help Earth recover from the terraforming damage. The enhanced bacteria that had saved the planet proved to be incredibly good at cleaning up the alien contamination. They broke down the toxic chemicals that the glowing flowers had released, neutralized the alien microorganisms in the oceans, and even helped restore the modified humans who had been rescued from Kethmori facilities. Dr. Patel established research centers around the world to study how Earth's immune system had evolved during the crisis. What they learned was remarkable. The planet had not just defended itself, but had become permanently resistant to biological invasion. The knowledge of how to fight alien terraforming was now encoded in Earth's microbial DNA, ready to activate if such a threat ever appeared again. Eleanor returned to her old job at the radio telescope facility, but now she listened to the stars with a different purpose. She was no longer searching for signs of alien intelligence. She was standing guard, ready to warn Earth if anyone else decided that her planet looked like a good place to colonize. 10 years later, as Eleanor watched her sister Anna graduate from medical school and start a family of her own, she reflected on what they had all learned. The Kethmori had been powerful and intelligent, with technology that seemed like magic. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the power of a living world. To defend itself, Earth had won not through superior weapons or tactics, but through the oldest and most fundamental force in biology, the drive to survive. The planet had taught itself to fight back, and in doing so, had shown that some worlds were not meant to be conquered. The stars still called to humanity, but now they call us equals rather than conquerors. Earth had earned its place in the galaxy through battle, and the scars of that victory would protect it forever.